Okay, it's the top of the hour. Good day, everyone. I'm Jose Valdez, Swiftland Accounting Coordinator, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Be a Manager and a Leader, Positive People, Positive Patrons. And today's presenter, no stranger, Lena Bruno. Linda has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skill to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management position. She develops her workshop based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI and Achieve Global. Please help me welcome Linda Bruno and enjoy her webinar. Linda. Linda, can you hear me?
Jose, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
All right.
The reason my microphone went off while I was sitting here talking to you. Just
Okay.
technology. So thank you everybody for being here today. I was talking to myself, obviously, but I was saying that just this morning I got another e-newsletter from one of the many that I subscribe to about management, and it was talking about the fact that people leave their supervisors, they don't leave their managers, or they don't leave their work. Even if somebody loves their work, if their supervisor or manager creates a demotivating environment, they're going to be out looking, aren't they? Because life is just too short to tolerate that. And what most people are looking for from their environment is a feeling of being valued and appreciated. So when they feel valued and appreciated, they are more positive. And when they are more positive, our patrons are more positive. So I want you to consider all the negativity that is flying at your patrons, the same negativity that flies at you, whether it's on social media, in the news, difficult people you're dealing with in the workplace. Your patrons are experiencing that as well. Many times they come into the library looking for a positive experience. So, we're going to talk today about some different areas that can actually affect that. And that what I would like you to do as we walk through this today is be thinking about what you can do differently to make your folks more positive so that your patrons are more positive. If you have your link should have included your handouts, and hopefully everyone has those. And the first thing on your handout is just a matter of fact that you cannot motivate other people. I often hear, how can I motivate them? How can I motivate them? You really can't. A lot of our motivation in the workplace needs to come internally, but you can help create a motivating environment. And that to me is as important, because when you're trying to motivate people, it's a one-on-one thing, isn't it? Where if you have 13 people working for you, you have to try to motivate each individual person. And that's great from the standpoint of understanding who they are, what they value in their jobs, and things like that. But if you create a motivating environment, there's kind of that overarching cloud, if you will, or a foundation of people enjoying their work in your workplace. And I think we all want that, because internal motivation has to do with loving what you do. I have a huge amount of internal motivation because I love what I do. Just 2 days ago, somebody stopped me outside and said, I haven't seen your office light on when I've walked by late at night. Are you retiring? And they acted like that was the best thing that could ever happen to me. And I said, oh gosh, I hope I never retire. And they looked at me like I had horns. And I said, I love what I do. It's an internal motivation for me because I get feedback from people that it was helpful or they ask me questions where I can move them a little further along. And so that's what you're hoping for with the people that work with you is that loving what you do attitude. External motivation is to get something. Now, I will also say most of us, if not all of us in the room today, have some external motivation going on as well, don't we? Because we need money to pay the air conditioning bill or to pay for the orange scone we want at Panera or whatever it might be. Of course, there's some external motivation going on there. It would be very odd if you had zero external motivation in your job. You like your paycheck. A lot of us like our benefits or our paid vacations or whatever it might be. So that's perfectly okay. But somewhere along the line, we need to create that atmosphere that people really love their work as well. So I want you to think about this. What are some characteristics of your environment that might contribute to internal motivation for your staff? You notice I didn't say cause it or create it, but it might actually contribute to that internal motivation. Hi, Susan. It should have been in your link to sign on to and Jose, I didn't get the link, so I'm not sure, but there should have been a link for you to access the handout as well. So you might check there, but yes, Jose had said earlier you will receive a PDF of the handouts, and then the recording will be available as well to match to that. So thinking about number 3, what are some of the characteristics? I'm thinking along the lines of giving people training that they might need. And sometimes maybe you don't even think they need it, but it's something they really want or knowledge about something. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. So would you type into the chat box what other areas of your environment might contribute to that internal motivation for your staff? That idea of creating a motivating environment besides just training, which of course I'm a little biased about. I love training and I love learning. I see several people are typing, so I'm holding off just a moment before I start plugging in answers on the screen for you. So many times you all in the chat add things to what I've developed on my own, and I love for people to hear from you. Jan, perfect. Praise. People love to be praised, sincere praise, right, Jan? They don't want it to be fake. They don't want you to have read a management book and it says go out and praise people every day. They want it to be sincere and specific, and they want to know that you're paying attention to them. Remember, they want to be appreciated and they want to feel valued. Informal meetings to keep staff informed. Absolutely. You don't want them to hear about things that are going on at your library, at their local Walmart or their hairdresser or wherever it might be. So you need to keep them in the loop. People get their feelings hurt. I'm just going to be that blunt about it when they feel like something is being kept from them. And let's everybody circle or write down the word chocolate that Jan put in there because, yes, that does help create a motivating environment, doesn't it? Sharing food together. Padmini said, find out what they like to do and have them apply it day to day. Exactly. I bet many of us in the room today have worked in environments where somebody just gave us whatever was in front of them to do and didn't even consider what our skills and talents were. And that can be so frustrating because if you give me something I'm not good at, for instance, if Jose said today, Linda, I want you to do an Excel spreadsheet, I could get through it, but it would not create a motivating environment for me because I don't use it on a daily basis. I don't really enjoy it. It's great as a tool. But if he said to me, Linda, I want you to come up with a new program on XYZ, I'm there. I'm right there with you. So finding out what they like to do and having them apply it day by day. And Susan said, lead by example. Wow. I continue to read many magazines and books with stories of, quote, and I'm using quotation marks now, leaders who don't show integrity, who don't develop trust, who are not very kind to their people, And yet they have these huge expectations, don't they, of the people that work for them. Like it shouldn't matter if I treat you like dirt. But it does, doesn't it, Susan? Leading by example is huge because you know what? We'll go the extra mile for people that lead by example. We'll make the extra effort. But if I see something inauthentic from you, then I'm probably not going to be a positive person that will create positive patrons. And Nevin said, acknowledge them, thank them, greet them, speak to them, right? All of the above, Nevin. They work for you every day. Somebody told me once that's their job. You know what? I know that. It's my job to conduct training. But it still makes me feel valued when people drop me an email to say, this really made a difference for me. I had somebody drop me an email a while back and she said, this brought tears to my eyes because it hit home. And I don't want to make anybody cry, but still it made me feel like I had made a difference for that person. Jane said, working as a team with you being part of the team. Absolutely. I've been in the presence of people who say the right words and they're not unkind people, but the way they say it, it makes it very obvious that they still consider themselves on a different level than the people they work with. And they are, in essence, they've got a different title, a different pay grade, but they aren't working as part of the team, Jan. And that can be disheartening, can it? Because it makes it feel like there's some kind of a barrier between you and them. So we all want to do that. No, Jose, no financial spreadsheets. Just not going to do it. It's not going to happen. So here are some of the areas that I'm thinking about. The training and knowledge we talked about. Autonomy, in other words, giving them something to do and letting them govern themselves, not standing over them, breathing down their necks, or giving some kind of an indication that you don't think they can actually do it, because that makes them feel like they're under a microscope every day. Relationships, building relationships. Some of you talked about working as a team and acknowledging other people, and all those kinds of things are what build relationships in our workplace, and that's what leads to positive people. I can sense when I go into different libraries whether there are strong relationships built. They're either working as a team, as Jan mentioned, or it's as if they might as well have printed on their foreheads, this is just my job. And if that's the case, the patrons walking in those doors are going to have that same sense that I do, aren't they? Where they feel that dis-ease, if you will, of friction or tension or people really not being engaged. And so then patrons, because we're human, a very unconscious or subconscious, I never know which word is correct, but a very unknown reaction happens for the patron and they start to get a little tense. So you're not going to create positive patrons when people don't have good, solid, trusting relationships. Challenges. There are a lot of people on your staff that like challenges. It makes them feel alive. It does make them feel valued, as several of you said. So you want to give them something that's going to challenge them, not necessarily that's going to develop a weakness for them, because if it's truly a weakness, they're never going to be great at it, and it actually backfires because then they feel like a failure. There's a book called Now Discover Your Strengths by Marcus Buckingham. And he talks about the fact that how sad it is in our environments where at our performance reviews, we focus only on what people aren't doing well. And he said sometimes that's necessary. Maybe they've gotten a little lax. Maybe they need to sharpen their skills or whatever. But so many times we focus on something they never will be good at. It doesn't matter how much training they get. They're never going to really be great at it. It's never going to resonate for them. And so the challenges you give them, think about that when you're setting those up for them and make sure it's something, as somebody mentioned earlier, that they love to do or that they would like to learn or that they've always been interested in, not something that they've never quite gotten the hang of and it's been 3 years, because they probably won't get the hang of that. Some other things that I'm thinking about, and as I mentioned, if you'll kind of keep these in mind, because we're going to look at them closer in a few minutes, and I'm going to ask you to come up with something you could do in a couple of those areas. I have talent work match. We already mentioned that. Huge, absolutely huge to have a talent and work match. And I've worked in environments where what my work was depended on what was piled on top of my boss's desk. It didn't have anything to do with whether I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I could do it quick or slow or whatever. There wasn't any concern for whether there was a talent work match. We already talked about feeling valued, serving others. When you have that atmosphere that your library exists to serve others, that makes for positive patrons, doesn't it? And it should make for positive people that are working in your library. I walked into a workshop one day, a face to face workshop, and we were just discussing something on break that didn't have anything to do with this. But one lady crossed her arms and she said, I'm here to protect the books. And my mouth kind of dropped open. And I'm thinking, hello, if you're not taking care of your patrons, you don't have to worry about protecting the books. And I understand there's a part of your job that might entail protecting books, but serving others, especially nowadays, when libraries are expected to be somewhat of a social service agency, we have to be somewhat focused on serving others, don't we? And if that doesn't come from the top, or at least from your level down, we can't always control what's going on above us. But if you have that attitude, then the chances of your people having that attitude is much stronger. People need that sense of accomplishment. We kind of alluded to that, but we never really zeroed in on those words. People need to know that what they're doing is valuable. Not just that it's appreciated, but they actually accomplish something. If you just had a summer reading program, or you've got one coming up and it's been the biggest one you've ever had, or you had a special program where you had baby goats come so people could read to them, or whatever it might be, you need to celebrate those accomplishments, don't you? So often we just think, it's just my job. When I ask people for special stories from their library, which is one of our programs coming up, a lot of times people will just say, it's just my job. I can't think of anything. So we need to have that sense of accomplishment. I'm going to be real honest with you all. I have a notebook on my bookshelf that I pick up not frequently, but occasionally when I feel like I don't have that positivity going on in my life. And it's full of emails and comments that people have made on evaluations that helps me have a sense of accomplishment. I'm human. So it's not meant to brag or anything else. It's just meant to assure myself that in the over 15 years I've been doing this, I've been able to help some people. So what can you do to create that sense of accomplishment for people? Other things, recognition, as Nevin mentioned, acknowledge them. Responsibility for some people, right? There are going to be some people maybe on your staff that really don't do well with responsibility. They're very steady. They're very good with routine. They're very calm. They're dependable. Those are all wonderful things. But sometimes when you need to give somebody responsibility, that may not be the right person to give it to. So all the things we're talking about, we want to step back and do what somebody mentioned earlier, and that is know who they are. Know which of these areas are going to help create those positive people in my environment. A sense of purpose. Sometimes that means going back to the vision of your library or the mission statement, or what are the values of your library that have been published somewhere. And a lot of times we can't even find them because they were done in a strategic plan 5 years ago, and they were put in the plan and they were printed on something, and then they just kind of got shuffled by the wayside. But do you know your sense of purpose? Not just for your library, but what is your sense of purpose? Do your folks know and have a sense of purpose? So that's another area. We want to encourage creativity. This is really difficult for some people when they are in the role of manager, because when people are creative, you know what happens? Sometimes they do better at something than we do as their boss. So this can be a threat for some people, and they kind of stifle that creativity, or they've been around for so long, it's sort of like, well, we never did that before, so there's no need to start it now, or we tried that 7 years ago and it didn't work on that one day we tried it, those kinds of things. So encourage that creativity. And people always say, let them fail. Well, I want to change that verbiage. I want to change that to let them experiment. To me, it's not a failure if you're being creative and that thing didn't work, but we're going to try this. I don't look at that as failure. I look at that as experimenting. And how will we ever grow and change if we don't experiment? Others, there are a lot of them, aren't there? That's why I said, and I have these listed on another page, so you don't have to worry about writing every single one down. But I do want you to think about a couple of the areas as we look at the next page. A team environment. Just type yes or no. Have you ever worked in a place where it was almost a competition? Yes or no? Aw, isn't that sad? But that's why I asked that question because I think most of us have. And there are times that competition is good. We know that. But when you've got competition as the main thought process, you don't have a team environment, do you? There you go, Abby. It might not be a competition per se, but there's no sense of team. And if you lose the team environment, it's going to be doubly hard to create positive patrons because, as I mentioned earlier, they sense that. And you know what? They've been exposed to that their whole lives too, and they don't want to find that when they come to the library. But just look at the number of people who said yes to that question. So be thinking about what can you do to create a team environment. And here's what I want you to also hear today. None of these things are going to be from A to Z. Too many egos, exactly, Melody. We're human, aren't we? We all have egos, and some of them come out to play a lot stronger than others. And so we have to be aware of that. All I want you to do after today's session, we're only talking for an hour here. So it's not like we're going to change the world. But I will tell you that if you will take a baby step based on something you hear today, you can change your environment. It may already be great. Many times, what I find in this kind of a program is a lot of the people in the room already strive toward these kinds of things. That's wonderful. So take a baby step someplace where you can improve it just a little bit more. And the team environment is part of that. Living my values. I need to make sure people know what I believe in, and then I need to live that way. I believe in presenting work. This is going to sound kind of silly that I'm passionate about. And the way I live my values is I had somebody inquire a couple weeks ago about a particular program, and it sounded like a really cool program, but it's not who I am. It's not my passion. And so I turned down work, which means I turned down air conditioning money because I'm self employed. But I want to live my values. When my clients come to me, I want them to know that if I accept a job with them, developing a new program or something like that, that they are going to get my best because it's something that I believe in. So live your values. Interesting work. What are they interested in? Do you know? Maybe one person loves weeding, somebody else loves shelving, somebody else loves outreach, and they might not even be in those particular job assignments at the moment. What do they find interesting? You all could probably say, I don't find conducting training workshops very interesting. And I could say, I don't find XYZ very interesting. And so if we don't find that, we aren't as positive about our work. Personal growth. I was telling somebody the other day what I have been finding. It was a friend of mine I had lunch with, and she and I used to do some training together. And we have very similar thought processes of as far as helping people grow and those kinds of things. And I said, what I'm finding is that there's more interest in the topics from Linda Bruno that have to do with self-development than there are the ones that are strictly professional development. What I'm also finding is some people don't get the connection. In other words, I will have people that are in higher up administrative positions that think we shouldn't have to talk about self-development because it has nothing to do with the library. And I am a 187% believer that if I can help you grow personally, you'll be a better employee. Period. The end. You can't possibly convince me otherwise. So personal growth might be an area. So thinking about that, number 4 in the middle of the page says, what are some characteristics of your current environment that may hinder internal motivation for your staff? What do you think? And let's take your current environment out of there. What are some characteristics of an environment that might hinder internal motivation? That way you don't feel like you're restricted to just talking about your current place, which is wonderful and there are no issues. I know that. So I want to take it out. Some of you who have worked for other places that you think, "Oh, I hated this when I was there. I couldn't even get myself out of bed in the morning." There you go. Clash of personalities, Jan said. And we're always going to have that, but if we have open communication and we talk about the fact that our disagreements are based on who we are as people, it's a lot easier to work through that. Negative Nellies. And sometimes we just have to just limit our exposure. A lot of us may have those in our current environment, and people will say to me, I can't quit my job. That's okay. But you also don't have to go to lunch with that person. You don't have to hang with that person. You don't have to engage in gossip when that person is doing that. Those kinds of things. We have to take control, don't we? Linda said a lack of communication or poor communication or secretive communication. Just kind of fill in the blank, right, Linda? There has to be good, solid communication for us to be internally motivated. I worked, and some of you have heard me say this before, but it's one of those lifelong lessons that I learned. I worked in an environment where one of the fellows said, I only tell people on a need to know basis, and you didn't need to know. Oh my goodness. Talk about taking internal motivation down to zero. That statement certainly did, and I never forgot it. And he lived his whole life basically that way. Jardine says when employees feel isolated and think management doesn't value their input. Jardine, we could have a whole program just on that statement, couldn't we? When employees think that management doesn't value their input. The struggle with that is management doesn't attend. It's the people that want their input valued that would be at that program saying, my supervisor needs to be here. That's one of the reasons I want you all to open your minds to the areas where you can make little tweaks and do better. So you're probably all thinking about this. Micromanagement, power plays, like Melody said with the egos, unclear goals, rigid adherence to rules. There are some that need to be kept. There are some we could just keep to ourselves. Perceived favoritism, culture that has been created over the last 3 decades, limited time. We use that as an excuse sometimes. A lack of emotional intelligence, all of the above. Just keep in mind that money helps people go to sleep at night, but it doesn't get them out of bed in the morning. Yes, I need to pay my bills and I'll sleep better tonight knowing I've got money in the bank to do that. But tomorrow morning, if the morning sun rises and I think to myself, oh no, I have to go to work, it will take me a lot longer to get out of bed, won't it? It's that internal motivation where I think I need to get to work today because my team is working on this or my boss is depending on me and I feel really valued. I'm going to get out of bed and go to work. Motivated employees equal high morale. That's what we're talking about here. And it's that high morale that then results in employees who typically, not always, but usually they treat patrons and coworkers and even their own supervisors with more respect. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about having these positive people. It doesn't just affect your patrons, even though that's the name of this particular program, but it also affects coworkers and supervisors. So if you can create that environment, your life is going to be a little easier, isn't it? Because that's how they'll treat you. Those people get more done and tend to share more ideas because they feel valued. They look forward to coming to work. They're not out there groaning at the gas pump about having to go to work tomorrow. And they tend to contribute more actively. How can I help? What can I do to make things easier? Those kinds of things. They weather tough times with you. And some of us have had tough times with funding or staff shortages or maybe natural disasters that you've had to deal with. They'll help weather those tough times because they have that internal motivation to do so. And they're out in the community being your ambassadors. And don't we all need more of those? Because there are some people in our communities that still don't get the value of a library. So when you've got that positive people atmosphere going on, they're out there talking about how wonderful their library is. Just keep in mind, better wages, benefits, all those kinds of things might avoid dissatisfaction, but they don't necessarily lead to real satisfaction, not that sense of worth and value that we want to create. Yes, we're going to keep fighting for better wages and benefits and all those things. but we're also going to understand that that doesn't necessarily mean we'll keep good employees. We need to have that internal motivation atmosphere going on. So think about just for a second, if you would, and type into the chat box if you can come up with a brief statement, a time when you felt you were working in a motivating environment, that it helped you stay positive and therefore you were able to influence other people you worked with or even patrons or customers. What made it that way? Would you type that into the chat box? See a lot of you typing. I love that. Jen said praise made it motivating and helped others see the benefit. There you go. Sincere praise goes a long way because you may not have control over whether you can give a raise or not, or extra vacation or something like that. Sometimes you don't even have control over how creative they're allowed to be, but you do have control over whether you praise somebody sincerely. Abby said people had fun working with, and we even enjoyed weeding together because you created that team environment, right? And Georgianne said acknowledgement. That's what made it motivating. I don't know very many people. They may not want to be acknowledged in front of a bunch of people, but most people want to be acknowledged in some way. And Jordan said the organization had a family-like atmosphere and everybody felt valued. And we don't always find that, do we? A supervisor that was very positive equals a positive workplace. Absolutely. And that's what we're looking for. And let's be realistic. We can't always be positive Polly, can we? There are things that go on in our environment. There are things that go on in our personal lives that can drag us down. But be willing to be vulnerable enough to be accountable to people and say, if I'm coming across as negative or dragging people down, let me know so I can figure out what's going on in my own head. Padmini said acknowledgement for your work efforts and going above and beyond. All of the above. So let's look at this. What are some things we can do that really don't cost a lot of money, can help create that motivating environment? Remember, I said we can't motivate people because we could do everything on this list and people still wouldn't have that internal motivation because they don't care. And there's not a lot you can do about that. I'm going to name a few, and as I'm naming them, write any down that resonate with you. And also be thinking about if there's something you've experienced that you'd like to share with the rest of the group. We already talked about leading by example, and your attitude has so much to do with that. If you come to work and you say, do you know what they did to us now? Talking about administration or city council or something like that, that's how everybody else is going to feel. And that doesn't create a motivating environment. Seeking their ideas and using them, because I had somebody come up to me in a workshop once and they said, I work for somebody who's always asking for suggestions, but we all recognize now that the suggestions are never used. So now the supervisor is frustrated because they're not getting good suggestions. They feel like they read in a book somewhere where they're supposed to ask for suggestions, but then you need to use them too, don't you? Food, lifesavers, bliss. Connect it with something you're already doing. Maybe something really weird happened and you bring in those little tiny Snickers bites tomorrow. Just to say, I know that was weird. You all handled it wonderfully. Have a treat on me. I hear about some people sometimes that will in July or August bring in ice cream for people. But that's just that little simple acknowledgement, isn't it? Somebody mentioned earlier, keep them posted, do rumor control, make sure they stay in the loop. And again, all you have to write down are the ones that resonate with you that you think you could do better at or that would really work in your environment. Celebrate whatever that is, achievements, number of years with your library, what your library has accomplished, how many people were at a certain program. Find reasons to celebrate. We can all find reasons to be negative. I talked to a friend of mine on the phone the other night, and he immediately started to go toward the negative. And I just shut up. I got very quiet. And he finally said, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. And he told me about riding in a ride for diabetes for a little boy named Gavin. And then that turned it to a positive. But we don't need the negative stuff. It's all coming at us anyway. Specific praise. We talked about pay attention to the word specific. Have an employee appreciation day. You don't have to spend a lot of money on these things. It can be you make cookies. It can be you bring in donut holes and cider or whatever it might be. You hang up a few streamers, you put up a balloon or two. You just let people know you're thinking of them and you appreciate them. sometimes doing their least favorite job. As somebody said earlier, working as a team, and maybe that involves doing one thing that nobody in your whole group likes to do, and you're willing to take your rotation doing that. Random acts of kindness week. In other words, maybe you announce at the next meeting that on August 1st, we're going to have a week where we just do random acts of kindness for ourselves, our coworkers, and our patrons. It's not mandatory. Nobody has to do that, but let's just build some excitement about doing things for other people without getting anything in return. Somebody mentioned earlier thank you notes or saying thank you. I'll tell you, folks, notes can make a huge difference if they're specific. People rarely throw them away. Number one, we don't write notes anymore. Number two, they don't get told specific things about what they're doing well very often, and so they just rarely actually get rid of them. And don't forget your part-timers and your volunteers. Think about, as you're thinking about all these things, encouraging work-life balance so that you recognize, yes, things might be going on with their families that you need to help them with or help them through or whatever. Can you think of any others? We covered a few there, not a ton. I have a list of several dozen, but I knew we had a limited time today, so I didn't go through the whole list. Consistency in treatment might be one, so that people don't feel like you're playing favorites. Here's one we don't often think about that I'm going to throw out to you. We need to discipline when necessary, don't we? And so often we think that in order to create a motivating environment, we shouldn't ever say anything negative to anybody. But you know what? If they're not doing their jobs and you never say anything and you never acknowledge that and try to address it, then everybody else that sees them not doing their jobs gets negative because they don't feel it's fair. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it's the discipline that actually helps create the motivating environment for the other folks. Probably not for the person that's being disciplined, although if you can dig to the bottom and find out what's going on with them, it can be very helpful. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. On your handouts, I've got some websites there for you might want to use. So I mentioned that I listed all the things we talked about right up front. Remembering birthdays, David, absolutely. Here's another thing. If you can, and you can go to the dollar store and get two for $1, or at the most $1 a piece. And if you don't have 150 employees, this wouldn't be real expensive over a year's time, but actually give them a card and write a note. Again, it's that extra effort. I told somebody last Christmas, somebody said to me, I didn't get your Christmas card out yet. And I said, here's the deal. Don't send me one. I didn't send you one. I don't do that. I just seem so people haven't really taken that to heart for several years. And he said, oh, good. And I said, when I get Christmas cards, I'm going to say I get maybe 15. Probably 12 of them just have signatures on them. And they're not really meaningful then, are they, David? Jan says, I bring them in a birthday cake. Yay. But I only supervise 3 people. So we could bring in some donut holes, right? That wouldn't be as expensive. A cupcake, one little cupcake, a piece of cake, something like that. But you get the idea. Remembering people is important, and they don't hear it as much as they used to. And their birthdays are the one special day that's set aside for them, other than all the other holidays. So those are the websites that are listed on your handouts. I love July 13th. I think we should all participate. If there are disgruntled workers, there are probably gruntled workers, right? I just found that one funny. So I suggest you all do that. You have plenty of time to do that. You've got 3.5 weeks to set up a celebration for Gruntled Workers Day. So that might be kind of fun. You can find reasons to celebrate, right? And Melody said we have birthday months and we all contribute for it so that everybody shares that. There are other websites on there for you to get inexpensive toys and giveaways. You've got that on your handouts. So we're going to look at that list we talked about. On page 3, what we're going to do is I'm just going to let you read through that, and I want you to pick something from one of those areas that will help you create a motivating environment that will create positive people, and then that spills over to positive patrons. It's the same list we looked at right at the beginning, but now I want you to pull something out from that list on page 3 that you could do something different, something better, something more often, whatever it might be. Would you take a minute to just review that? And I'll put them up on the screen as well, a few at a time, so that you can pick one if you didn't happen to download the handouts. So the first section, training or knowledge, the letting them do things on their own, the autonomy, building relationships, giving them challenges. That's the first batch. If there's anything there you think you could tweak a bit, add, do differently, do better, make yourself a note. And if anybody picked one of these four, would you type that into the chat box, please? Because before we leave today, in about 20 minutes, I want you to have found one thing that you could do differently to create positive people. That's why we're here today. Jan said I could probably do the challenges better. I think that's a very common one that gets left by the wayside, don't you, Jan? We got work to do. We just got stuff piling up on our desk. So let's just get it done, right? Now, here's the thing you need to hear, though. There are certain personality styles that if you don't give them challenges occasionally, they're probably updating their resumes, right? I am that personality style. It's called a powerful choleric, and I need to be challenged. I need to have something new and different. People have called me driven before in kind of a negative way, but I feel like it's a positive. And it's one of the reasons I love to develop new programs, because it challenges me to learn and grow and figure out a way that I can get that information to you and help you learn and grow. So challenges is something that a lot of us can struggle with, because we just have that big pile of work on Monday morning when we come in and we start divvying it up without really realizing that maybe Susie over there in the corner would really like to have something different for a change that would help her learn and grow. Anybody else pick anything from this segment before we go on to the next? Okay, I'm going to go on, and if you pop something up, that's fine. We'll catch it when it pops up. The next batch, the talent work match. Are you really thinking about who this person is and what they're really good at, or what they would like to learn, or what they've always wanted to experiment with? Are you thinking through that? Are you making sure they're feeling valued? And this doesn't mean, folks, that you have to go around every Monday morning at 8:15 and tell everybody how wonderful they are, because that, by about the third week, makes them feel used. It's very inauthentic to do that. It's finding a way that you can think periodically about, have I shown Deb how much I appreciate her? I've had people before, and I've told people this, and they look at me kind of askance, like, why would we do that? But I've actually suggested to people before, you keep a list and you just put a date beside the person that you expressed acknowledgement to if you have a lot of employees. Now, Jan has 3. She can probably keep track of that pretty well, can't she? But if you've got 17, and let's say you've worked really hard over the last 6 months to help them feel valued, but you weren't keeping track, and 2 of them never got anything said to them, not because you don't value them, you just were moving through life. That's why keeping a list might be effective, so that you don't look like you're showing favorites. Helping them understand how they're serving others, or you serving others. You see that somebody's under a big workload, and for some reason they were off for a day or whatever, and they've gotten behind. Can you serve them by helping them catch up? How can you give them a sense of accomplishment? What does that look like in your current environment? So, did anybody find anything in this batch of 4 that you could do better at? Feeling valued, Linda said, and serving others. And Ruth said feeling valued as well. You know, I've had people say to me, "Oh, I never feel valued." Well, if you're going to be a role model, that's not the point, is it? You may never get that acknowledgement from the people above you. But your role as a supervisor or a manager or a leader is that the buck kind of stops with you, that from you down, people will know they're valued. Daniela said matching work and talent. It's not really that hard. None of these are they? Nothing I'm giving you is hard. You're not going to go have to study on it or anything like that. But it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of getting into a habit of doing some of these things. And then once you do that, a talent work match, sometimes maybe it's somebody you really don't interact with that closely, but you could certainly ask them, couldn't you? What's your favorite part of your job? What have you always wanted to learn about working in the library that I haven't given you an opportunity for yet? We may find out they're great at it. We may find out they're not so great at it. And that's all part of the process. Abby said, I know that I make a difference in the students' lives, and that makes me feel happy. So, how do you, Abby, I don't know how many people work for you, but how do you make them feel valued? And that's what we need to think about too, isn't it? We know how it makes us feel when people value us. So, how can we make other people feel valued? So, that's that batch. Let's look at the next batch. Recognition. Little different than feeling valued. Recognition is something specific, isn't it? You know, I gave you those websites on your handouts and on that screen of places you can get inexpensive toys or giveaways or whatever. There are some of the coolest little mini buttons that are very inexpensive that you can get from Oriental Trading that say awesome job, high five, things like that. They also have little mini praise cards, they call them, that are very inexpensive. They come with envelopes so nobody else would be able to read them. And they say similar things, ninja skills, A plus, things like that to just let people know you really noticed what they did. That's that recognition piece. Abby says she has one person work for them. I noticed that she's helping students now more than she did at first, but our relationship is not at all good. That is sad, Abby. But it's truth, isn't it? Kiana said, we'll work on feeling valued. I think that's another area, like I mentioned earlier, probably all of us could take a baby step in to do a little bit better. And I get it, Abby, and thank you for being so transparent in the chat box today because some of you are probably thinking the same thing. Linda Bruno doesn't know what she's talking about because I could never do this with my staff. Well, but if you never do, then nothing ever changes, does it? So we have to make that effort if we can. More is the team environment we talked about, which somebody mentioned very early on, living my own values, making sure they have interesting work, and helping them with personal growth. So out of that batch, which one could you work on a little bit? Jan said living their own values. It's important to them. You need to live yours, they need to live theirs. And sometimes those trains don't meet, do they? And we have to understand that and be okay with that and try to be empathetic with that. We don't ever have to agree with them necessarily on some things that they value, but we also shouldn't judge that because when we have that kind of an environment where people feel judged about their own values, then we cannot possibly have positive people and positive patrons. If you hear that big loud boom, it's because we're having thunderstorms, so I'm going to apologize in advance for that. Number 10 says, remember, you can't force somebody to be internally motivated. Before I learned about personalities and behaviors and things like that, and before I tried to grow in my own supervisory journey, I kind of thought I should be able to do this. I should be able to force them to be internally motivated. Why aren't they really engaged in trying to do their job well? I had 16 people and 15 of them were great and one just couldn't be bothered. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't make her be bothered. Abby said, I'm working on my own personal growth and praying a lot. My superiors know that. I always give a big smile and a good night, but she rarely even picks up her head to respond. You know, Abby, and the thing we have to acknowledge sometimes is that's their issue, isn't it? If we're doing our part, that's all that can be expected of us. Maybe open a conversation at some point to say, I notice that we don't have really good communication. Is there something I'm doing or is there some way I can help with that or whatever? Jen said, I have one employee I work with you can't motivate no matter how you try. Thank you, Jan, because that's exactly what happens sometimes. And here's what the danger with that is. Sometimes when we've got one or two people like that, we give up trying. And so the other people who could create internal motivation don't have the opportunity because we gave up trying. We just figured this is the way everybody is. So be careful you're not punishing the people who do want to work toward being positive because of the people who never will be positive. Exactly. You have to let them go sometimes. Absolutely. It's true. And I already mentioned this, so I'll just fill it in. According to a Gallup poll, people leave managers and not companies. We already talked about that. So you know that's a fact. If you're a manager, a leader, a supervisor, whatever you want to call it, one of the best things you can do is help them figure out what they want and help them achieve it. How are you going to help them achieve it? Zig Ziglar used to say about training, the only thing worse than training people and having them leave is not training them and having them stay. So if you train somebody and having them leave, yeah, you have to retrain and rehire and do all those things. But in a sense, it should be personally fulfilling if you were able to help them grow to that point. Trying to motivate by using fear or focusing on just benefits or tangibles, that might get short-term results because they're afraid of losing their job, but it's not going to develop loyalty. It's not going to develop trust. It's not going to be a long-term sustainable solution on how to keep those positive people. So yeah, it may work for a little while. I worked for a fellow who thought intimidation and humiliation was the way to spur people on. And I lasted for a while, but he's the one that finally broke me and I left. And he couldn't understand it because that's no way for people to have to work. So to encourage that environment in your organization, ask more, talk less. This is, I've heard this so often defined as what the definition of a true leader is. They ask more questions and they answer fewer questions because you're helping people grow. You're helping them be their best selves. If you're helping Linda Bruno be her best self, it would be hard for me to be negative about that, wouldn't it? Unless you were standing over me with a stick, beating it out of me, which some employers do, not with a physical stick, but with a verbal stick or an emotional stick. So ask more questions, talk less, help them discover things on their own. One of the biggest demotivators you can present in your work environment is a constant feeling of people failing. That's why I said watch your verbiage, watch what you're giving them. Don't give them things that you know they'll never be totally successful at unless there's just a dire need for cross training. Then explain that. I know this is not your forte, but it is something we need to have coverage on. So I just need you to figure out the basics and then we'll go back to doing what you really enjoy. But if people feel a constant feeling of failure, it's very demotivating. I've worked in those environments before. And most of you that know me know I'm a pretty positive person. But if I get beat over the head enough with negativity and humiliation and intimidation and all those kinds of things, it's hard for me to pick myself back up. It's hard for me to be that positive person I truly believe I am. So be careful of that kind of an environment. Allow employees as much freedom as you can. Like I said, the autonomy that we talked about earlier, can you give them some free rein in something just because they haven't done it the way you thought they should? Did it get done? Was it satisfactory? Did it work well? Then they should be allowed to do that. Ask some questions to determine what that environment looks like to them. Ask yourself what that looks like. Because sometimes if you know what it looks like for you, it can be a good clue as to what it might look like for somebody else. Here are some of the questions on page 4. They're written there for you. You don't have to write a thing down, but this is a great little mini manual for you to go back to. Let's say you really work on this and you see that, your environment seems to be more positive, but sometimes things get heavy, workloads get heavy, lots of things happen at the library or in your community, and things start to dwindle back to the negative again. Pull this back out and take a look at it. Is the right role for this person? Is this the right role for them? Do they like to work with people or off by themselves? All the things you see there. And try to get it realigned. It's sort of like I always read articles about finances. I'm self-employed and by myself, and so that's always kind of top of mind for me. And one of the things that I often hear people talk about is rebalancing your finances if you have investments. Well, I'm getting fairly close to the age people would typically retire. Got a while yet. But based on that, I need to be aware of rebalancing, don't I? So sometimes just use this list to kind of rebalance your people portfolio. I just coined that word. I think I'm going to patent it. You have a people portfolio, don't you? I'm gonna develop a program on that. Oh my goodness, the light bulb is going on. You should all be scared. But seriously, you do need to look at that from time to time, don't you? Because things happen, you kind of get in a groove, a routine, a rut maybe, where you need to go back and look at some of these questions again. So think about to yourself, based on the questions that we just looked at, what other questions might you ask about yourself or an employee to understand whether there actually is a motivating environment in your organization? What other questions have you asked yourself? What other prompts have you asked yourself or employees that have helped you determine if something needs adjusting? Can you think of anything else? I'm going to go back to the ones I had listed. Maybe those will trigger something for you. Jan said, "Are they happy, or is there something that can be changed to help?" And sometimes you have control over what can be changed. And then sometimes you have to acknowledge to that person, "I would love to give you more money, but first of all, that's probably not going to be sustainable, is it? It'll make them happy for a little while till they get that bill paid off." But you might have to say that's an area we really don't have a lot of control over because the council controls it or whatever might be the case. That's okay. At least you opened the conversation. The communication is a piece of that, isn't it? So are they happy? Is there something you can change to help? You could even say, "I'm sensing you're not really content in your job. What's lacking for you?" That might be a different way to word the same thing, right? Just kind of feel them out and see what's going on. "Well, I really want to be working with animals." Okay, then. Probably the library is not the place to be because we only have the dogs come in once a month. So that's not going to help, is it? So Zig Ziglar said that about training. He also said this: motivation isn't permanent, but neither is bathing. It's something you should do on a regular basis anyway. So, yeah, we know that anything we talk about today isn't really going to make it permanent, is it? That's why I said keep these handouts, pull them out occasionally, rebalance your people portfolio, and then move forward to a better motivating environment until something else might happen. And it very likely may. And you have to take a look at it again. So at the bottom of page 4, it says 2 no or low money motivators I'm going to try within the next 3 months. Would you type one of them into the chat box, please? I want you to be accountable. I'm not going to follow you around to see if you actually do this, but sometimes just typing it in front of everybody makes you more committed to actually doing it. So would you type at least one into the chat box, something you're going to try within the next 3 months out of that list of no or low money motivators we talked about? I'm going to give you a moment to do that, and then we'll wrap up the webinar. Linda's going to work on leading by example. Jan's going to look into pocket praises and chocolate. Yes, and you know what you can do, Jan? You can get them dark Dove chocolate, and then it's as if you're helping them with their health as well, right? That's the excuse I use. I see other people typing. Just want that commitment from you folks. You spent an hour of your day today. You invest in an hour that you never get back. I want to help you find a way that it'll make a difference. David said, "I'm going to treat for the end of summer reading to celebrate." Absolutely. Love that idea. Jordan said, "Thank you notes. Remember, make them very specific and personal, Jordan, so that they keep them, so that they remember you value them." Ruth said, "Some kind of recognition." So many opportunities there, aren't there, Ruth? Constantina said, "I keep a jar of mixed chocolate in the workroom, Jan." Okay, there you go. Daniela said, "Notes. I love getting them. I should start giving them." Yes, we all love getting them. I have a friend who's going through some major health problems. She has been a good friend to me all through my husband's illness and his death. And she used to help me get a lot of training when I lived in her area and all those kinds of things. And so I went out the other day when Hallmark had their buy one, get one free at Publix, and I picked up 8 cards for her to just mail them periodically. It's not the same as thank you, and yet it is because I'm recognizing her. I'm helping her feel valued. We don't even work together, but I know those notes will make a difference. And the first one I mailed last week, I wrote a personal note on the bottom of it. I will write a personal note on the bottom of every one of them. So help people feel valued. And then the last question is, what's one other thing I'm going to do? I'm a little pushy, aren't I? Abby said it's wonderful, especially in a time when people rarely send cards. Yes, and that personal note, I'm telling you, makes it 198% more valuable to that person because you wrote a personal note. So, what's one other thing besides the low or no money motivator that you're going to do differently? Maybe thinking back to that list of areas we might be able to improve on, whether it's training, giving them additional training, helping them be creative, giving them some responsibility. That big long list we looked at the very beginning and then again on page 3. Jan said helping them live their values. Yes. Just want to move you a little bit forward here. I know we're wrapping up our time, so I'm going to say thank you to you all. I do appreciate you being here. I especially appreciate your willingness to participate because we learn so much more when we gather information from everybody in the room. So thank you for being here today. Remember, positive people equal positive patrons. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you next time.
Hear more. Thank you, Linda, for an informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoy this webinar, we ask you to join us again on July 17 at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's for Linda's next webinar, a customer service masterclass. One more thing. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on our Swiftland calendar, Swiftland Facebook page, or the listserv. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a terrific rest of your day.
Thanks for having my back, Jose.
Anytime.